Hello, if you're online, it'd be good to know where you're dialing in from and how you're feeling today. Good. Got Frankfurt. Feeling good, and Dusseldorf. Feeling blessed. Thank you, Stefan. From Pakistan. Thank you. Switzerland, Dubai, New York twice, Bedfordshire, not far from me. Meg from Manchester, Luxembourg. Maidstone, in Crete in Greece, Merseyside. From Sutton in Bath. That's wonderful. Staffordshire, Hanover. From the Netherlands. Berwick-upon-Tweed, love being on the train going around that bend, it's gorgeous. Brazil, hi from Brazil, hi from South Africa. Grateful from Bristol, thank you, Rachel. In Brussels, Nigeria, Oslo. We really are, Saudi Arabia, really are a global crowd here, it's wonderful. From Egypt, London. Time. From India, Janta from India. Good to have you all. Hi Gary, I'm also in Hertfordshire, I'm in Hitchin in Hertfordshire. Biggleswade, yay! Big up from Biggleswade. From Germany, from Cheshunt, from Switzerland. Luxembourg. We'll give it another minute and I'll start just after 2 o'clock. Orlando, Hertford. Hi Clive from Hertford. What time is it? Okay, again, another little minute or so, and then we'll make a start. I think we start. So thank you everybody for joining me on this webinar. We've got about 45 minutes and in that 45 minutes we're going to spend some time thinking about team resilience. I did make a slide change on the at the very first for the title. So when I was asked a few weeks ago if I wanted to be part of the webinar series, of course, fantastic. But on reflection, the question, the title, Building Team Resilience and Managing Dynamic Unpredictable Challenge. So a little heads up, you're never going to manage dynamic and unpredictable challenges. That is, it is impossible to manage them. But what you can do is you can manage in times of dynamic, unpredictable and challenging. So managing within that. So I just think to give yourself a little break in terms of what you can control and what you can influence. You can manage yourself and manage others, but you can't manage the challenges themselves. Okay, so with that in mind, just set a scene for you about who we are and what we do. So I'm coming to you as part of Ashridge Executive Education, and Ashridge is part of Holt and EF, and we are part of one of the world's largest education companies, and so we're able to offer quite a wide range from language, training and cultural experience through to executive education for global leaders from around the world. We've got 60+ years experience of delivering that executive education. And we're triple accredited, which is only, I think there's only 1% of business schools in the world are triple accredited. So it's underpinned by research, and fundamentally it's designed to be relevant. So it's pragmatic and useful for people to actually think, feel and act as leaders. What else? So this 45-minute webinar is to share with you. So what I wanted to do is give you a frame of thinking about what's actually going on at the moment, and helping you think about where you can focus your energy in terms of working with teams. And I want you to think about teams in the broadest sense. So teams, either literally the teams that you're leading or you're part of, but also teams that if you're working in a more cross-section of different teams, you're part of several teams, you may be part of learning groups. But I also want you to think about it in terms of your family that you're living with, because these are exceptional times, and a lot of you are in lockdown with people that you last year wouldn't have imagined you'd be spending 24 hours a day with. So I want you to think about it in the broadest sense. So the Round the World Yacht Race is a literal research that I've done, but I want you to think about it metaphorically to help you think about how to frame what we're doing. I want to share with you some thinking around this current dynamic environment that we find ourselves in, to help frame it so that we can manage the territory a little bit easier if you have a map for different quality conversations. And the chance for some questions and answers. And questions I get asked I can't answer because of time, I will come back to you afterwards. So please do ask questions because I'm very interested in helping you think through some of this stuff. And also we've got the whole online skills that are running simultaneously, which are remote access to learning and development opportunities, and it's live leadership workshops. So while this is very much a broadcast to you, so as I understand it, there's several hundred of you online at the moment, I can't interact with each of you because just literally size and scale. But the whole online skills are very much more like the work that we do face to face. So we are looking to develop customized, motivating, engaging learning opportunities for people to think and act together to develop their understanding of themselves in whatever the subject is. So let's get on with the actual webinar. So I'm Trudy West, I'm a leadership faculty and I'm also action researcher. So that literally means, so my leadership faculty role is I design and deliver programs for organisations around the world, leaders as individuals, leaders in groups, leaders in teams, organisationally, and in all sorts of different sectors, so public sector, third sector, private sector. So drawing on lots of experience to help people think, feel and act as leaders. And my particular area of interest is in integrity under pressure. And I, as part of that, so this is where the action researcher part, I've carried out first and second person inquiries, looking at the integrity under pressure and how it can lead to hypocrisy. So integrity for me is how you think, feel and act when you're under pressure and when you think no one's looking, and how that when you are under pressure and when you're experiencing fiction that we'll talk about later, hypocrisy can be seen to allow the desire to appear virtuous outweigh the desire to actually be virtuous. It's also described as a skill to act to cope with the social moral contradictions, and I'm particularly interested in how it's playing out in the world today, with how we might judge and justify our actions against someone else's actions, for whether people are going out during lockdown, for example. Anyway. And the intention for this webinar is I want to draw the distinction between personal and team resilience, because they are distinct. As I say, I'm going to share the Clipper Race findings to help you frame and map. I'm going to offer you a way to think about and explore the experience of this current situation, because I think it's ultimately feeding into every part of what we're doing at the moment, how we sleep, how we think, how we are making our decisions, not making decisions, procrastinating, struggling to even you know, get off the sofa sometimes because of the situation is just overwhelming. How do we have better quality conversations? And alluding to the title, you can't prepare for everything. Your teams can be more resilient and be responsive to anything. So how do you help develop that environment for people to be able to thrive under pressure at a team level? So I just want to get a feel of where you are. So what are you finding most challenging at the moment? So let's take this current context. What are you finding most challenging at the moment? And this is not a finite list. It just was a list that we thought might capture most people's thinking. So if you could tell me where you are: personal resilience, the physical threat of the virus itself, being in lockdown, having to work remotely, having your children at home with you whilst you're working remotely, having to think of new ways of working, the financial implications, and anything else. So I'll give you just a little while to answer that and we'll see where we are. Okay, let's see what we've got so far. Can I have the results, please? Okay, so personal resilience, so it's a broad range actually. Other, which I can't see the other, but the financial implications are huge. An ordinary time of any 6, 8 months, 10 months ago would be an issue, coupled with everything else. Remote working, homeschooling. Lovely, thank you. Thank you. So that just gives you a little feel of where everybody is. So with that in mind, I want to draw the distinction between personal resilience and team resilience. So you may or may not have seen a webinar that Vicky Colpin, Professor Vicky Colpin, held a few weeks ago, and her webinar was focusing on personal resilience. And she offered 2 definitions. One is the physical property of a material that can return to its original shape or position after deformation, that does not exceed, so it doesn't snap. It gets pulled and pulled and pulled, but it doesn't quite snap, and it's able to come back to its original shape. More interesting for us and the work that we do is around the psychological resilience, around the positive capacity of people to cope with stress and adversity. Now, of course, that is individual members of teams, that's very important. So a little bit more just to kind of refresh you or to give you some insight if you haven't seen Vicky's webinar. Those protection factors for resilience at an individual level: sleep, exercise and diet. Physically, what are you doing physically to be able to develop more resilience? The psychological aspects are the confidence in your ability, interpersonal confidence, self-awareness, optimism, and family, friends, and having people around you so that you can actually have conversations about what's creating tension for you and friction, for example. And of course, the organizational stuff, so the control and influence that you have, the change as challenge, how do you reframe that? The personal vision, why are you there? What difference does it make? You know, what is it that you want out of the big picture? The flexibility and adaptability to operate and not be fixed, to have a more growth mindset. The social connectivity, that you're not in isolation, and learning from feedback and to be able to do something different as a result. So these are the protection factors for individual personal resilience. And these are critical even at team level, so within teams. How team resilience differs is that the process of managing pressure effectively across a team as a whole. So this is a group of individuals, and it is the resilience of that group that we're going to be looking at. So at a team level, a group level, to be able to develop the capacity to deal with future challenge and adversity. Now, what does that look like? I'm going to draw on some research by a colleague of mine called Jill Flint-Taylor and colleagues of hers. And this is made up of several factors. So her research around resilience, team resilience specifically, draws on these separate factors. Now you've got a personal resilience of the team members. So that's all the stuff that Vicky was speaking about last week, a couple of weeks ago. All of that does make a difference to a team level resilience. However, having 5 individually resilient team members does not mean that you have a resilient team, because you may have 5 very individual team members that are not communicating with each other, for example. They're not developing the capacity to be able to deal with conflict. So you've got 10 very resilient people that are arguing all the time, but they may be quite resilient in other areas of their life. Another part is the diversity in the team. And the diversity in the team means you've got lots of different perspectives, experiences, and having difference in teams and the inclusion that's essential for that to work leads to greater innovation, greater creativity. It leads to performance, better performance, and borne out in research. So creating that space for diversity to exist and not become fractured is critical for team resilience. Another factor is that team level positivity, that sort of sense of optimism for a team, that what they're doing is going in the right direction. It's not that kind of complaining cycle, it's never going to work. And complaining once about something, it raises awareness of what's wrong, what's not working around here. But when it's a cycle of complaining, it can just bring everybody down. So complaining, do something about it. What can you do about it to change it? Catching yourself in the complaining cycle, if that's where you are. Balanced leadership style. So either you are leaders or you are part of a team, but being able to be balanced in the way that you are responding as a leader. And this, I'm going to come on to this a bit further on, but being able to meet the needs of the team rather than having your style that is yours to deploy, regardless of what the team needs. And the high levels of well-being, which is around the sort of healthy, happy prosperity notion that, that the mental health is in a positive direction, that life satisfaction, that people have meaning and purpose about what it is that they're doing and how they're operating. And all of this is hinged around the sources of workplace pressure and support and how that's managed. And this is things like the time that people are expected to be in the office, workload, stuff around deadlines, job insecurity, which we've just seen, around the financial implications of. All of that plays into the team level resilience and its capacity to respond to future adversity. Now, knowing that and doing that are two different things. Knowing that's what you need to do and being able to experiment into it to develop the capacity to do it happens live. So understanding it cognitively is not the same thing as being able to do it. So what I wanted to do was to share with you a story about the sailing race, to act as a frame for, like a metaphor for thinking about, well, if you were on a boat, if you're currently on a boat, imagine your team is a boat. Where are you in terms of the different constructs within the research? But also how it literally played out in practice. So it's a story for you to think about, how does this actually play out? And of course, the conditions are different. Of course, we're talking about a sailing race. But it's I found it to be a very useful frame for people to help create language for them to think, feel and act within a team so that they can have a better quality conversation. Okay, so this is one of the boats. This was from a few years ago. I'm not a sailor, so I think it's important for you to know that I'm not a sailor. So I came at this with fresh eyes. In fact, this is one of the only times I've been on a boat. In fact, I'm there in the red. Feeling very thrilled to be in New York and by the Statue of Liberty ahead of a short trip around the bay. And what was really useful to know about the sailing race was that while we have a white flag here that says this is the end of the race, what we discovered was that people they were interested in winning, but it became as a secondary thing for a lot of people. Some were there specifically to win. Others were there to come in the top half or the top third or not come in the bottom half. Some were there to learn to sail. Some were there to raise awareness of a charity, to raise money for a charity. Some were there because they'd been made redundant and it was a good way to spend a year traveling around the world. So they were there for very different reasons. And even though it was specifically a race, that did not factor in why everybody was there. Now, if you put that into perspective, it is a clear 10 boats racing against each other. And yet even that clarity was not enough for people to come together about why they were there. And So what I did is I went to the different ports in to go and interview people about their team and leadership's findings and how their experience of things. And I came back and basically calculated all the findings and the interviews and the whatever. And we came up with a model, and the model applied very consistently. And I want to share with you around alignments, capability and autonomy. Let me just check on this. Okay. So I want you to consider multiple perspectives and still align with each other. Focus on the capabilities required and the level of autonomy required and necessary for a team to be able to operate. Okay, so I want you to imagine you're leading your crew. So your team is either your literal team, it might be, and often where I use this model for most effect is working with project teams that are coming together. Sometimes when clients are coming together with suppliers, and how do you develop trust between a supplier and a contractor and the organization. I work with this model in experiment groups when people are trying to bring something new to the table, to the market, in tech teams, departments. And as I mentioned at the beginning, you as a family or you as flatmates or who are you living with, and how might you use this framework for thinking about how do you have a different type of conversation to develop your team to be able to be more resilient about how you go about and how you're going to operate. So I have two daughters, and I noticed I was using the model when they were moving from childhood into being teenagers, because they had a different level of need and requirement as they were operating further away from the kind of apron strings of their mother. The capability changed, what they needed to understand. The autonomy that I let them have was based on their understanding and the alignment that we needed between us. So let me explain a little bit further. So despite these extreme weather conditions, the performance pressure, you've got to win, close confines, they were living in and I did think about this, and it kind of made me smile a little bit to think about the close confines of all of us living in lockdown. And the physical exertion, the physical tiredness that they were experiencing, there still were positive outcomes. So while we couldn't use the race as such as a, if this then that outcome, it was quite clear that some boats had very positive outcomes, and at different points other boats had them, around teams taking responsibility, so being able to make their own decisions and act into them within a frame, the alignment, putting in awesome effort, really kind of acting as a team to get the best result possible. So not just ticking a box of what do we have to do to demonstrate that we've done it. And the majority of the team pulling their weight. So people really going the extra mile to perform well and be able to deal with what was going on. So not just the sailing race, but to deal with conflict, to deal with communication, to deal with trust. So the more human aspects rather than just the technical aspects. The crews on the boats often had negative outcomes as well. And so we were weighting how much of the negative outcomes the teams were experiencing. And there were two negative outcomes. One was something that I described as fraction, which is teams within teams. When teams fall apart, and you still have teams, but they are one big team, and then you have little teams within teams where people become closer to people that are similar to them in some way. And they're not them. So it becomes a bit more them and us. But also friction, which slows people down. And friction it came from the military literature you literally take things that rub together, it warms them up, it slows them down. If you take the mechanical friction, they use it in the military as a way to kind of what's getting in our way. So the definition is a physical or moral impediment to action. And while there was conflict, of course, you can imagine, 10 people, 20 people living on a tight boat. Of course, there were arguments between them, but it was less about the arguments as such, but what was causing the arguments. Or it could be, I don't know what I'm doing, and that's a friction. So it's an inner conflict. And the word conflict is a very emotional word, and it makes you think about, literally. But if you take the conflict away and you think about it as a friction, there's a friction between us. That's something that's a much better quality, but much better starting point for a quality conversation, rather than why do we always keep having conflict? that in itself is a conflicting statement. So I found friction, and I have since found with the work that I do, people being able to deal with friction and what might be getting in their way, impediment to action. And I wanted to just take a little step back from the sailing race, and I've been thinking about in my action inquiry around what are we actually distracted by? What are the frictions in this environment that we're currently sitting in now? And I find it easier, I think, in concepts, and I find it easier to conceptualize like a map so that you can orientate yourself around the world. It doesn't make it right, it doesn't make it wrong, there's no valence to it, but it just helps you navigate yourself, but it might also help you navigate the conversations with your teams. So I've been thinking a lot about what's currently creating, and this framework came to me, and I've been testing it out with lots of people. Does it make sense? Does it just to help you think about where is the focus on any one day, and sometimes it's all at the same time. So I've broken it down into 3 parts. One is the COVID, and please feel free to add your own. Let me bring up the chat box. Hang on one second. Chat box, cool. So let me just open this back. So the virus itself is literally the threat of the virus. So this is a focus for us. And I'm saying us, and I'm making some assumptions when I say us. I'm thinking it, there's lots of people I'm speaking to, and I'm going to make some assumptions that you make. Let me say presumptions based on probability. So the virus itself, the physical threat of the virus, losing people that we love, losing famous people, losing just hearing of death, it creates terror management and the vulnerability, but also the positives of the frontline bravery, of seeing that bravery and having that hope and that respect for people to be able to be frontline. So that's the physical threat of COVID-19. Then it overlaps with how does that impact us on a day-to-day basis? You know, how are national policies playing out, for example, when we see New Zealand compared to Ecuador, and what's happening as a day-to-day result of some of the decisions that are made at a policy level. But even things like social distancing, what are the rules? Am I allowed to go for a jog? Am I allowed to do can I go and sit in the park? The moral dilemma of what's okay in this environment. And just not seeing family and friends. But I also added resentment around, you know, if I'm stuck indoors and I see people outside sitting having picnics, they should be indoors, and I have judgment about that. But also I'm quite resentful because I'd quite like to be outside having a picnic, for example. So that resentment about judging and justifying ourselves and other people. Yes, someone saying that a positive is a selfless act of philanthropy that we're seeing, of people, you know, just realizing there's a need and wanting to meet that need. Day to day is literally, so it's kind of almost sort of forget the virus, forget the future, just literally having to get on with this difference of what we're literally doing today that 6 months ago we would never have imagined. And actually just take homeschooling. If you were told 6 months ago, oh, in next 6 months, you're going to be at home with your kids all the time, locked down, with your kids and teaching them. So having to, you know, supervise them while they do online courses, and you're going to have to help them learn. Just that on its own would create a crisis. And suddenly we are now here with this, everything else that's going on, the existential angst that someone's just mentioned, with the virus, with not seeing our friends and family, not having that social support. The endless Zoom calls, I don't know, but someone's eating too much, absolutely eating too much. Yes, you're right. How much can you eat? And when can I eat next? But again, the positives, the celebrating the NHS, coming together in communities in a way that we haven't done for years. Celebrating, I've written NHS, so the National Health Service in Britain, but also medical services around the world. Catching up with life, excuses not to exercise, so not being able to exercise, and suddenly I've got a perfect excuse not to exercise. But as it happens, I've just started running, so just thought I'd share that. Then you've got where day-to-day overlaps with the future. So these are decisions that I need to make now based on a future that I just don't really know what that looks like. What will happen in the long term? What difference will it make? Where do I need to invest my energy? Am I just being busy for the sake of being busy? Adapting to new ways of working and being able to still make decisions, even though you've got the kids at home, you've not seen your mum, you know, all the different things that are contributing to be able to make decisions is quite difficult. And then the future is, am I going to survive this financially or otherwise? Will there be a recession? And it's not going to be a recession like any other recession we've experienced, because recessions are based on fiscal patterns. This isn't based on a fiscal pattern. This is based on a virus. And we haven't had that since Spanish flu 100 years ago. So what now? How does that pan out? Things like what even happened to Brexit? So, you know, for British people, Brexit was front and centre, has been for years. Now we don't even, it doesn't even factor. But of course, there's new opportunities. There's how do we, well, and the impact on the environment, you know, whether it's true or not, dolphins in Venice, what a wonderful thought. How smog is lifting from different countries that have been high in industry, for example. And they're just, yeah, so, and then finally the future and how it interacts with the virus. So testing, vaccinating, are we going to be tracked digitally? Are we going to be have it, not have it? Are we suddenly going to have a you know, a divisive process? If you know, if I wanted to be cynical, I could wonder about that and think, are we going to be tracked on our phones, for example? And how will borders be managed? What's going to happen politically? Now, all of these things are happening at the same time in a way that we've never experienced before. This is the perfect time to demonstrate the friction that I'm talking about that came from the research. This are moral and physical impediments to action. What do I do? How do I do it? When do I do it? What does their future look like? What do I need to do now? Am I allowed to do this? Am I not? All that weighing up is taking a huge resource from our capacity to think, feel and act, as is with your teams. And all this while experiencing trouble sleeping, vivid dreams, difficulty focusing, lack of motivation, guilt. Should I be doing more? And the impact on mental health in the long run. You know, it's a very big concern for me. But also this new kind of connection with people, the opportunity to do something different, a sense of calm, of not having to rush everywhere. Although I've been, you know, a lot of people are much busier now than they were before, but just in different ways and undefined ways. Chance to catch up, an excuse just to read a book, sit in the garden, watch the birds, you know, whatever is your thing just to catch up on. But what's come out of the conversations I've been having recently is it's really important to remember that someone else's experience doesn't negate yours. So if someone has a worse experience than yours, it's very easy for us to go, oh, mine's not as bad as that, so I'll squash mine down. But actually, what I know about people working under pressure, the adrenaline that gets produced when you are experiencing the pressure, the body doesn't know the difference. So if you are worried about your financial situation, which, you know, 31% of you are, as a choice out of others, that is still the same anxiety that you're experiencing as if there was a lion through the door. The body doesn't know the difference. So your body, you have to pay attention to what your body is telling you about the anxiety that you're experiencing. And also a positive experience doesn't necessarily cancel out the negative ones. You can hold on to it, and we were talking about just before about reframing, but those negative ones are still there, and vice versa. They can coexist, and just recognizing that has been very helpful for several of the action learning sets that I've been working with, that actually I don't have to constantly feel grateful because of this positive thing, and so therefore I shouldn't be experiencing this negative thing. They can exist. Okay, so I think just some compassion, and Amy, a colleague of mine, Amy, is going to be doing a webinar in a few weeks around compassion and the compassionate leader. So if you're interested in compassion and developing that as one of the capabilities, I advise you to find that webinar in a few weeks. Okay, so where are we? So back to the race. So these are just, that was just a frame for you to have a think about, where are we spending our time and the frictions that we're creating, that are being created for us, and also the capacity of humans to create our own friction. So animals if an animal hears a noise upstairs, they don't have the storyline of the last horror film that they saw running through their mind of don't go in there. Humans have the capacity to imagine, and it's a wonderful capacity, but it also comes with a health warning of imagination can lead to thoughts that are maybe true, may not be true, maybe projection, maybe based on experience. So it's being able to catch yourself in those moments of what is a useful dream, imagination, hope, and when am I creating my own fear around situations. All up for grabs in terms of helping you think, feel and act. So the model that came, basically alignment was a really important part of any boat. Now you don't have to have high alignment, you might have low alignment. So if you're expected to deliver 30 widgets on a Thursday morning to a company that you are delivering 30 widgets to, you don't have to be highly aligned, you just need to turn up with the widgets. It just is a sliding scale of where are we on at any one point. And high alignment typically led to better outcomes. So it meant that people were able to, so the common identity is I want to belong to this bigger picture. So in terms of resilience, this is the social support stuff. I want to belong, I belong to this bigger entity. It's not just me as an individual, I belong to something bigger than me. And I want to be part of that. So as a team that was aligned, that had high alignment, had high common identity. It was inclusive, they value what's important about the individuals. And importantly, identity is separable from performance. So what I found in the research was if you are known as the winning team and then you don't win, who are you? Suddenly you have a loss of identity because you're not the winning team. You're now a losing team that was winning, so it got confusing. Whereas the teams that had high alignment, they had an identity, but it was separable from how they were performing in the race. It was based on something completely separate. It could be the color that they wore or the mottos that they had or whatever. It didn't link to performance necessarily. Common intent, and I think this is probably the kind of the heart of the alignment part. Often in organizations, we give people visions. This is where we're going. This is what, or this is the purpose. This is where we're heading to. This is where we're going. Unless it aligns with the individual's purpose. That doesn't mean it has to be the same as, but it just doesn't get in the way of what I want out of this. So common intent is what is our intention is one, what is my intention two, and what is your intention, and having a clear understanding of those three things and how they can map to each other. So, and then with having that coupled with the common identity, we are part of a bigger group. I will endeavour to help you meet your intention. You might endeavour to help me meet mine in terms of reciprocity, and together we work towards the bigger picture of what we're trying to achieve. And this is the point in the work that I do where most shifts happen, is to be able to have the conversation about what is it that I really want from being here. It might be to win, but actually it might not be. It's to raise, I really actually care about this charity, for example. And winning, I mean, it'd be nice to win, but the thing that I really want is to raise awareness. And if I can raise awareness of this charity, that would really make a difference in my motivation and my drive to really show up every day and do a good job. So I called it the cards on the table conversation about what is it that I really want, not the bland one, not the one that we all agree to that can end up a bit beige, but the one that really matters to me, but really listening to what really matters to you and what we come to. Now, it could be I decide where we're going, but it can also be co-created as a leader. Where do we think we need to go? What can I draw on my diverse team and their knowledge and understanding, for example? The second part of the model was the capability. So one of those things would be developing those, so there's the team resilience model. So that would be one of the capabilities. But the development of skills and processes required for leading, learning, and in the case of the race, literally living together, and in the case of us here in lockdown, literally living together. And when skippers developed or created the environment for people to develop for themselves, the capability required to do the thing that we want to do, the friction and uncertainty reduced. So people were able to answer their own questions and to develop their own ways of dealing with friction and being able to do something about it. This rests with the technical capability of how do you sail a boat? How do I learn virtually? How do we work virtually? How are we literally going to connect with each other when you're in your office, you're in your home and I'm in my home? I was talking to a friend yesterday and they were saying about their finance team. The program was designed to only work from the office, but the person who does the finance has to work from home. So they've had to reschedule and do the technical capability of moving all of that home. That's a capability to enable the team to flourish. The technical capability of anything, of how do we literally do the thing that we need to do, the technical part, but also the people capability. And actually this probably was bigger than the technical. Of course you need to sail a boat, but once you've learned how to sail a boat, you kind of know, I mean, you can get more skillful at sailing a boat, but the technical stuff you can learn, and the better you get, the better you get. But the people capability was really important. How do you develop trust? How do you have honest conversations? How do you develop resilience of the team, of the individuals? And this is literally a bucket for the thing that you need to think about. What is it that we need to develop so that we can have an environment for each of us to flourish, but also us to flourish as a team? And now, I said, Vicky Colpin did a resilience webinar a few weeks ago. That's one capability for individuals. Compassion, Amy is doing one in a few weeks. Speaking Truth to Power, a colleague of mine, Megan Rates, is doing a session on that. So here's some more capability for you to think about in terms of developing your capacity as a resilient team. And also agility, another colleague of mine, I've got blank, I don't know, Harrison Morale, Victoria Harrison Morale is doing one on agility in a few weeks. So these are all pieces of content for you to think about developing your capability with your team. And then clear and consistent processes that reduce friction rather than create it. You know, don't need to be reinventing the wheel. And then finally, this is Vicky's model that she used last week, autonomy. The degree in which you give people the chance to do what they need to do, or when you need to control. And there is a point where sometimes you do just have to say, this is what I want you to do, and this is how I need you to do it. So high autonomy, respond to why. Low autonomy, respond to what. High level of complexity, a high level of control. So these are just a different, and it spreads across this certainty and agreement model. And a story that I can tell you that really kind of brings it to light. In one conversation, I was running a team event for a group of 65 young leaders. I was talking to my client. I said, I'm thinking about doing a treasure hunt. We're going to do a treasure hunt. We could do a treasure hunt as they get into their teams. And he's great. I said, we do need to consider that it's outside. It's going to be autumn. It might be dark and muddy. We need to just consider the health and safety aspect. And he said, I'm Dutch. I don't worry about health and safety and following procedures. We treat people like adults and we let them choose. So let them deal with the why and their level of complexity and make their own decisions. And I said, well, I'm not worried about the health and safety tick box exercise. I'm literally thinking about 65 young leaders running around in the mud and falling over and hurting themselves. And in that one sentence, he then added, yes, we're an American company. If anything were to happen to them, we'd probably sue. So in that one sentence, we've moved from complexity, leadership to control. So of course I ran around the garden and did the full tick box exercise of health and safety. So here's a question for you. Recently I was speaking to a leader and he described his leadership style as that, a Karentansic leadership style. So without Googling it, I'd like to ask you, what do you think a Karentansic leadership style is? Is it one that creates space for reflective practice? Or is it one that leverages incentives for performance? So what do you think? Without Googling it, what do you think is a Karentansic? Okay, can I see the results? And that's what we thought. I was with my colleague, so let me give you the result. I'll tell you the story. I was with my colleague and she had written Karentansic in her book as we were interviewing this CEO. And she said, I knew you'd know this leadership style. I didn't recognize it. And so I said, oh, I don't remember him saying that. I don't remember. And then I'd written in my book, carrot and stick. So just as a way for you to remember the leveraging of, it can work. Carrot and stick can work as a perfectly reasonable leadership style. It won't lead to a resilient team if what they're doing is purely around carrot or fear, reward and fear. That won't lead to a resilient team. Having that reflective practice team is going to help you develop a resilient team. So where next? I just want you to, we're just going to head towards the questions, but just take some time. Where is your team in terms of alignment? If it's high, the chances are they're going to want to develop their own capability. You don't have to keep feeding them things. They want to, they're more motivated. Go back. The capability required, where are they? What do they need now, especially with everything that's going on? What's the technical stuff they need? What is the human stuff that they need? The people, the communication, the trust, the dealing with friction, how do we actually have the cards on the table conversation? And then autonomy. How much autonomy are you giving them? Because actually when left to their own devices in these crisis times, I'm finding that people are quite inventive about how to solve their own problems without following a process that was designed a year ago, without having any foresight about the fact that we were going to be in a pandemic now. So just after this webinar, spend a little bit of time. Where is your team in terms of alignment, capability and autonomy? Higher alignment will give you more scope, more motivation, more drive to be able to develop capability, and in line with those two things, you are able to give more autonomy, leading to more resilient team to be able to hold themselves with common identity. And so what? This has been a whistle-stop tour. I want you to make, well, you're adults, you can do what you like, but what I'd like you to do is spend a bit of time afterwards, maybe listening to the webinar again. What does it make it think? What does it make you think about? And what does it mean to you? And how might the use of these frameworks, stories and metaphors that I've shared with you, for example, have a different quality, lead to a different quality conversation with your teams? How can you, it gives you a language. My hope, my intention was to give you a language to be able to have a better quality conversation, because ultimately that is the shortest line between A and B. Any content that you're thinking about developing, any way that you're thinking about approaching, the quality conversations with your teams and that creating dialogue and space, given the environment that we're in at the moment, is what will lead to a team that is more resilient, according to Jill Flint-Taylor's model. So as I say, that's a whistle-stop tour of team resilience. Are there any questions? Let me just close this down and open this up, and I'll see what I can answer. Get rid of that. Questions and answers. How do you maintain your resilience in a team when you found out? So as a leader working with my team remotely in semi-government organisation, when I found out one of my team got COVID out, how can I maintain the resilience of the team? And that's very difficult, because it's possible, but it can feel like, I can imagine it would feel like the whole team goes down with them, the emotions of it, the worry, the concern. Sharing open and honestly how you're feeling is really, without being fearful, you know, if managing your emotions so that you're not, if you are feeling terror and fear for yourself, managing that, but being open and honest with your team is really the best way to be about the concerns that you have, and let them be able to have the concerns with you. Strong capabilities to be developed in the current environment is the question. Can they? It depends what they are. If you're trying to do something that's not in line with what's actually going on, so now is not the time necessarily to develop a new finance system. That is not likely to help you because people won't have the energy to be able to think and have the capacity to think about how this works and what do I need now. Some things just need to be as was, because the energy is needed elsewhere. So it's really the capability you can, particularly if people are motivated towards it. How am I doing time-wise? A little bit of time. Ooh, probably not. I'm going to come back to these questions, and I will go through them each, and I'll contact you directly. because I'm conscious of time. It was literally a whistle-stop tour. I hope it was useful. Come back to it, spend some time with it afterwards. And I say, any questions you have, please contact me and I will endeavour to answer any questions that you have. Okay, thank you very much. And I look forward to hearing from you genuinely. Okay, take care. Bye.